Spółka Biogen, partner strategiczny
Biogen,
szóstego forum.
Biogen, the strategic partner of the sixth forum, and then Polmek Group and other groups and companies displayed on the screen are partners of this forum, and ahead of us is a very important debate. In a moment, the editor-in-chief of Top Agrar in Poland, Karol Bujoczek, and important guests will be debating. And after the debate, please bear with us, because we'll be for the award handing gala, award ceremony in the competition of an innovative farmer. Karol Bujoczek, the editor-in-chief of Top Agrar Polska.
Szanowni Państwo,
Great, thank you.
Dosłownie 20 lat temu,
Well, it was 20 years ago in
w
March,
połowie marca,
in the middle
po
of
raz
March,
pierwszy Agencja Restrukturyzacji i
the
Modernizacji
Agency
Rolnictwa
for Restructuring and Modernization of Agriculture for the first time opened a call for direct payment under the Common Agricultural Policy. That policy would apply to Polish farmers after Poland's joining the EU. We're all quite excited. I think that most of you gathered here in this hall do remember the day when, on May 1st, 2004, Poland was joining the EU. I remember this atmosphere of concern and worry. Many farmers were skeptical about this Polish accession to the EU. But the Poles voted for joining the EU in the referendum. Now we're here to talk about the community of farmers in Europe and about membership and its benefits, advantages. So let me invite our panelists and speakers, Jerzy Buzek, an MEP and the chairman of the Foundation for the EFRWP. Sir, we are so happy to see you here. You're a permanent, frequent attendant of our forum here in Jasionka. Please take your seat. May I please leave these seats for myself? And may you please sit next to me when, unfortunately, I'm the one that will be monitoring all panelists. And Milan, Vice Minister of Agriculture of the Czech Republic. The Czechs, our southern neighbor, also in this group of Central and Eastern Europe, we're joining the EU. Sir, welcome, and we are quite curious about the experience of your Czech farmers. Now, Michał Kołodziejczak, Vice Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development. Sir, welcome. Mr. Kołodziejczak, the Minister, felt that agricultural policy personally and had a very personal brush against this policy. Then we have an expert from Team Europe Direct, Jerzy. He was one of the negotiators negotiating the conditions for Poland joining the EU. I believe that it was on your desk that all these terms and conditions were, if not written, but verified. And then Viktor Szmulewicz, the chairman of the National Council of Agricultural Chambers. Mr. Szmulewicz has been an active member of farmer self-government, and he was a deputy head of COPA Koncheka. we'll cover that, we'll get to that when discussing this European community. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that we'll have the opportunity to give the floor to you as well, and we have planned a Q&A session during this debate. Gentlemen, let me start with Mr. Buzek, Prime Minister Buzek. Sir, it's been 20 years since Poland has joined the EU. What is your opinion on our successes, and what could we have done differently? We do not need to cover the whole economy. Let us try and focus on the agricultural sector and development of rural areas. Sir. Excellent. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Well, I feel that I'm a co-organizer of this forum. I couldn't join you yesterday, because I was tied down in Brussels. But let me refer to what happened last night. Well, we have certain arrangements, certain aspects that the government agreed upon with farmers, and that is quite unusual, amazing achievement. Well, these agreements meet the key demand of those who are on strike in Poland today. They meet these demands halfway. And there is a very good reason why the situation of Polish agricultural sector is in a very difficult situation today. So it starts with the statement that there are so many difficult and painful reasons, but this first one is the most visible, the most striking. But this agreement will improve the general atmosphere in the country. We need to reach a consensus. Dialogue is the most important part of our activity related to the agriculture. And if we don't start with dialogue, then things come apart. Yesterday, these negotiations were long and difficult, and both parties are dissatisfied to some extent, and I think it's a good omen. It cannot be that the winner, when one party takes it all. So both parties were actively engaged in the negotiations. And I think it's important for the mood, for the atmosphere that surrounds agriculture in Poland and in Europe. 20 years, well, I'm not going to dwell on that. Well, the extent of the export of Polish food to the EU, well, we actually conquered, in fact, the European market 20 years ago. My government was negotiating agreements for 4 years, but I remember all these transformations in the region of Podlasie. We were spending huge money, although we didn't have the money at that time. We believed that Poland's joining the EU would be a great opportunity. The farmers were not convinced that joining the EU was the right thing to go about it. So this is why we need dialogue. This is why we need to exchange views. Perhaps I'm the one to blame too. Perhaps we neglected or overlooked that need to have an open dialogue with farmers. And nowadays, the difficulties on the European market, they may come from these past errors, but we are definitely better prepared for the future. we have these foundations of the common agricultural policy. The level of direct payments was different, but then when it comes to development of rural areas and multifunctional development of rural areas, and we had the biggest investment here in Europe. The farmers who grow crops and produce and sell them to the market, where they put in a lot of effort and a lot of valuable production. So these were 20 incredible years. For some countries, that period took 2 decades, well, not 2 decades, but 2 generations. And now it seems that we are the superpower when it comes to agricultural produce in Europe. And we've been always involved in the most serious negotiations. So that shows that Polish farmers and the Polish agriculture sector did the homework. And now we are the driving engine here. It's worth remembering that 20 years ago, there were concerns on both sides. The EU farmers were concerned about competing with Polish farmers, and the Polish farmers were concerned about the prevailing power of Western European farmers. But it seems that our agricultural system, our farmers have won, and we are in the EU. Well, the result of the referendum was at stake, and I'm very happy that farmers changed their mind back then. But in brief, we can see that the Polish village, Polish countryside has changed tremendously. I often travel across France or Belgium or Germany, and I can see the difference. Well, we have great tractors, very powerful machines. When the EU offers certain compensations to all farmers. Perhaps in the second part of this panel, we can go into details here, but this is our tremendous success. Now, my question goes to the Minister of Agriculture of the Czech Republic. Mr. Dadurek, you come from a country where the structure of farms is very different. In Poland, an average farm has 11.5 hectares, and in the Czech Republic, it is 150 hectares. So what is the opinion of Czech farmers on the past 20 years, and could you please list success factors and potential aptitude for change, or what you would change?
Děkuji za slovo, pane redaktore.
Thank you, sir.
Vážené dámy, vážení pánové, já musím
Ladies and gentlemen,
děkuji za pozvání vůbec tu.
I must begin with thanking you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to speak here at this beautiful place, in this beautiful hall. And the opportunity is quite special. And you are discussing important things, and yet you found time to talk to neighbors. Apologies. The minister couldn't be with us because he had other engagements. Coming back to your question, the structure of the agricultural sector in Czech is different from the one in Poland. And it was back then we were still planning to exceed the EU. The crisis of the 90s impacted us quite severely. And basically, a large part of our country had no agriculture. It was basically all a legacy of communism. Private ownership was basically liquidated, and everybody had to belong to cooperatives. As a result, it was difficult to encourage people to return to farming. I'll give my family as an example. We had a farm in the interwar period. In the communist period, my family could not live within the radius of 100 kilometers from that old farm. So basically it was difficult to return to farming. The situation in our country was completely different from yours. For us, EU accession was a simpler choice. From our point of view, CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, brought a number of benefits. Also, it has brought a transparent form of management. It is thanks to that policy that we have access to new markets. Similarly to Poland, we export a lot to third parties. We have access to 450 people. That's how big the market that we have access to is. Because when I say outside, I mean outside our country. So what can we do in the future? I think it has popped up in the debates that I've been listening to. We have similar problems across Europe. Certain things could have been done differently. What do I mean by that? I mean how farms have been controlled, red tape. You see many difficulties and issues there. And I'm speaking about Czechia here. I don't know the situation in Poland. When I look at the Eurostat data or data generated by other institutions, I can say that this is not how shall I say that? It doesn't show that the system has worked all that well. It could have been done differently. Things could have been done differently. When it comes to imports from third countries, we are on the same page. Our farmers need to meet quite difficult restrictions. Some importers never meet these conditions, even though they have access to the internal market. So let's talk about our recent years. Could you repeat that?
What do you think, after this 20 years, is the level of satisfying of Czech farmers is good, middle, or is bad?
To není snadné, protože nežijeme ve snadných dobách.
It's not that straightforward. It's not that straightforward. These are not easy times. We, just like you, have been impacted by COVID. The supply chains got broken. On top of that, we've been impacted by the Russian aggression, by the Russian war. Mostly Russia was discussed, Ukraine less so. I don't think we can leave them to themselves, to their own devices. So basically we are being impacted to a similar degree. Farmers in other countries have been expressing their own opinions. They are not happy at all. We have talked to our farmers. The thing is, their approach is quite negative. The situation is different in our country. We have fewer problems.
A část těch protestů, a
They are not as deep, though.
vás známe, tak část těch protestů ve skutečnosti je vedená konkrétně dnes.
Let's look at the protests.
Je vedená snahou podpořit
We
solidární
know that there are protests taking place today.
konkrétně zemědělce
Their aim is to support the Polish farmers, to stand in solidarity with them. So we are not protesting against the government. We are protesting to show our solidarity and our support for the Polish farmers. It's a message that is being sent to the European Commission. They need to cut the red tape, change their priorities in terms of imports and how the internal market operates. Thank you. Minister, if I may, I'll make this jump. I will address Viktor Szmulewicz now. He represents the so-called farming self-governments. Let's look at practitioners. How do farmers today see the upsides and downsides of our membership? Very briefly, let me add something. I'm also an active farmer. I produce commodities. So I saw what it was like before the EU. I saw our accession, and I can see what the situation is like right now. I've been quite fortunate, I must say, because I've been through all these transformations, and I saw it as a farmer, managing my own farm. I inherited my farm from my parents in the 1980s. So there was this period that was quite difficult when Deputy Prime Minister Balcerowicz was introducing his reforms. It was difficult for us. It was tough. Andrzej Leper and other farmers were protesting at the time. We all had our own demands. Speaking as a representative of farmers, we have this self-governing body, and before the accession, we supported said accession. Józef Waligura was the president at the time. I was the deputy president. Kajdanowski was another one, and we took an informed decision at the time. Again, I was quite lucky because when I was a student, I had internships abroad in Switzerland and other places, and our generation at the time had this dream to open up our borders, to tap into all this experience, to share in this civilizational development. It was a great opportunity, this EU accession. The former Polish Prime Minister has actually spoke about that, and it showed our strength. People doubted us. The farmers saw the Western farmers, and we believed that the Westerners would simply wipe off the surface. But we were not wiped off. We stood our ground, and it was largely due to our respect for priorities. It is largely due to how much we loved our land. It wasn't that we focused on buying new cars or benefiting materially. No, we kept investing. We invested in new equipment, we invested in new land. It's always been difficult. Unlike in the other Central European countries, most of the land was in private hands. Yes, it made things easier, indeed. I'm talking about typical farms, because there were those collective farms, right, post-Soviet legacy, but it was different. This was a different case. Now we have these farms, and they are doing well. Many of them have collapsed, though. Just let me finish. So here we are where we are. My generation has seen all that, all these transformations. And there is another generation that is coming in, and they don't remember those old days, because we've been in the EU for 2 decades now. These new farmers cannot see the benefits of the EU membership. They just take it for granted, all of them. They see it as something obvious. Maybe it's partly our fault. Maybe it is us, the older generation. We never prepared our children for the fact that sometimes it is difficult to live because times get tougher. Mind you, what we missed was stability, and a lot of structure has been introduced due to the EU membership. Yes, the structural elements have been discussed here. So we exceeded. There was the strong farming lobby with the EU. At the time, it was breaking up to some extent. The subsidies reached 50%. New countries exceeded, and it was brought down to 35%. And, the new countries paid less, so there was less and less money going to the common agricultural policy. And there are these new movements, pro-environmental movements. I'm not saying these are pseudo-environmental movements, but these new movements started breaking the foundation of the agricultural system. More about it later. In the last 20 years, when did we make mistakes? What could have been done differently from the point of view of rural areas development and the development of our agricultural sector? Okay, it's different when you see things after the fact. Our experience was about moving from communism to capitalism, from the socialist diktat to the free market. So it is easy to discuss things now after the fact, but let's just say that we've been hugely successful. My sister married a German farmer. In the 90s, I would go there, and I wanted to take a ride on his tractor, to experience that. Basically, back then was a paradise that was after. 20 years on, he comes to me and he wants to take a ride in our equipment. So this is how things have changed. Well, for a moment, he even considered selling his farm there and buying it here in Poland. Many people have. Dr. Jurek Plewa, over to you. A question. What's your opinion here? You observed our negotiations, you observed our accession process. It was difficult to introduce equal pays. I talked to Commissioner Fischner, and he said you need to prove that you have higher yields, higher than 2.9 or 3 tons of wheat per hectare. We started with 25%. It was supplemented from national funding. We negotiated milk quotas. At the time, we thought they were too low. A question. Has there been a moment when we missed something? Have we missed something at a certain point that was important for our development?
Many people were engaged in the negotiations. I have the honor that the Prime Minister Buzek, who is here with us, appointed me the negotiator responsible for the agriculture. I was also responsible for implementing the CAP. The atmosphere was different then. Farmers had some fears about the membership, but then they felt that it was their common solution, shared by everyone. Mr. Balasz can confirm that at that point we're opening the negotiations and we went to Ireland together. Oh, it was 2001. Time flies, but it wasn't 2021, it was 2001, sir. We had a meeting with Irish farmers and their trade unions. And they started off by saying that they didn't want to have Polish farmers at all, didn't wish to see us. So we prepared some texts, some brochures debunking certain myths about Polish farming and Polish farms. Well, among the myths, like the Polish farmers were concerned about the deluge of some expensive EU products, food products to the Polish market, and the foreign farmers, Western European farmers, were concerned about the influx of cheap labor force to their countries. And now I'm following the political scene, and when I see the slogans on that the demonstrations, farmers' demonstrations carry, and I think it's quite painful to see that. I'm happy to have this debate. I'm happy that we can have this debate in a very different climate, on a very different note. I appreciate the efforts made by Mr. Balasz because of high tension, because of all these interest engaged. It was not easy to debate. We also had negotiations with different groups of leaders, producers, etc. We have with us Mr. Olejnik. At that time, we were negotiating our position regarding cereals. I think it was quite positive because we succeeded in keeping up the dialogue. I remember the mission that the Prime Minister entrusted me with. I was delegated to go to farmers, meet farmers, and explain the CAP. Well, negotiations are about reaching a compromise. When these negotiations were coming to close in 2002, they carried the milk quotas on the negotiation standards, and then the entire program of the Copenhagen summit was disrupted. We didn't make it to dinner organized by the Queen of Denmark because we couldn't agree to the milk quota. We wanted more, we wanted higher quota. They didn't give us the right perspective, the right prospect for growth. And later on, when there were views and prospects to move away from milk quota, actually these were Polish farmers that were reluctant to do that. We succeeded to do it, and Polish farmers only increased milk production after the quota had been removed. And about our failures, or about my things that I'm personally surprised with. In my opinion, we've been for 20 years in the EU, but the level of knowledge or information about the CAP is less than low. Well, some people miss the truth with bravado. That's the only way I can describe it. They misinterpret or mispresent the picture. That could be the result of a deficit of a dialogue with farmers. We were exposed to a lot of propaganda recently. This is my only explanation. But I regret that farmers failed to consider, analyze, and see all the aspects of what is happening right now. No one questions the fact that the situation in the agricultural sector is difficult. No one questions the fact that the global food prices index got back to its level of 2021, and all the indexes went down, and that is a manifestation of an issue, but it is not as bad as the protesters wanted. And everything apparently boils down to some anti-Ukrainian and anti-Russian slogans. I don't think this is the issue, so I'm very happy that the efforts made to calm the waters. And with that, I know that the chairman here, that the gentlemen here, they have the right type of experience. We need to meet the requirements that come with the CAP. There are some mistakes or cases of misinterpretation. Green Deal is a strategy, and then Poland has its own strategic plan. That plan has been agreed in Poland. We do not need to change anything in Brussels. Czechia has a different scheme than the Polish scheme. We have several dozen schemes, and that is the responsibility of a government in agreement with farmers. Minister Dodurek is saying that they have 3 schemes. Right, thank you. Mr. Bujoczek, sir, you are a young farmer and you are a fresh minister, fresh in the office. So what is your view on the 20 years of Poland's presence in the CAP and the EU farming? So you are from this new generation of farmers. Perhaps you haven't personally experienced the old system. Do you feel that we are well prepared for the competition on the European market?
Na początku musielibyśmy postawić takie pytanie, które może stać się pewną tezą do tego.
First, we would need to start with a question that could also respond to the developments of today. I'm the person who is known for my reconciliation efforts.
Postaramy się tutaj kilka faktów przedstawić.
Let me present some facts here. So my question, which is also the thesis, is if it's so good, why do we have it so bad?
Ja mogę powiedzieć, no jest bardzo dobrze.
Well, I could say that things are great.
Każdy o tym mówił. Ja jako młody chłopak, 16-letni, kiedy
When I was 16, I was 16 and Poland was joining the EU. I was a farmer's son and I did want to work on my farm.
Bardzo mocno jako ten, który prowadzi gospodarstwo,
So today,
ten, który reprezentuje rolników i stara się
wear
załatwić ich interesy,
2 hats.
patrzy nie tylko przez pryzmat
I'm a farmer with my own farm in my own right, and then I'm a minister, and I look at things from the point of view of farmers' interests.
i nie odzwierciedlałaby
So I want
w małym procencie
I want that situation to reflect what is happening right now.
Jeszcze raz?
Jaki jest ten stan faktyczny?
So what is the current condition? What is the current situation in? Well, we have farmers who are a bit older than I am, and they have a slightly different view that I have. So I work with a negotiator who sits next to you, Mr. Buzek, at the European Parliament, Minister Siekierski. Victor, I must say it, I'm sorry. I don't think it is right when you say to the farmers, that we're active farmers. We're like active, 100% active farmers. It is not exactly like that. I know that you have a farm. I know that you consider yourself a farmer, and I consider myself a farmer too, but we are here in a different role. Our role here today is to serve farmers. I have quite many different functions. I wear several hats, and I want to present different pictures from different perspectives.
So a question. It's been 20 years. Look at these farms. Money has been invested. CAP received for 20 years. Those farms, how are they ready to compete both in the EU and abroad and outside? We have certain standards. They've been set. We can agree that all this technological and other forms of equipment wouldn't have happened had it not been for CAP. I started this discussion with an analysis. How could we have done things differently? How could we have prepared better? So we have a certain standard, and we have to use it to work for the future. Yes, a lot has been discussed, or rather, a lot has been said about this material state of affairs. But the thing is, many people had to give up farming. They had no choice. They couldn't continue.
Ja pamiętam tutaj pan też negocjator mówił o wymienił SAPART. Mnie
SAPART has been mentioned here. SAPART makes me think of farmers. They took the money, but they were not properly prepared. They had no awareness. They didn't know what the threats and benefits would be. SAPART makes me think of farmers' fears and concerns with the bureaucracy, with the red tape that was just kicking in. But it was the easiest path to buy a tractor and to get a subsidy. What I'm saying is how I was seeing it as a 16 or 17-year-old boy. At the time, our farm was going through a difficult period. Money was invested in cooling facilities and into buildings. Those programs were used to actually buy all that. So we had a different level of awareness. It might have been raised better. If it had been raised better, we might have had more investment. Would you say that your farm is well equipped and that we can participate in the market well? Yes, for a number of reasons. We had various sources of financing, and people often think of those. 300 billion zlotys. That's the total amount, at least as far as I know. Let's talk about the downside of the current system. There is this thing that we farmers hate, that we'll never accept. Decisions are taken without us. Let's look at the last few years. The European New Deal, various changes, what has been happening in Poland, politically speaking. I've got this strong feeling that these decisions have been made without involving us. As a young person, I cannot even imagine Poland outside of the EU. The EU is a great opportunity, but also there are certain threats out there.
Status materialny polskich rolników.
So, what's the material status of the active working farmers? It has improved. Sure, that's true.
Ale jednej rzeczy nie udało się zrobić.
One thing has not been accomplished. It is not because of the EU.
Chociażby postrzeganie polskich rolników.
I mean how Polish farmers and farmers in general are perceived. It is linked to those decisions that don't involve us at all. But it's also linked to the social status.
Zaraz wrócimy do tego tematu.
We will return to that in a moment.
Myślę, że jak rozmawiamy, to powinniśmy się słuchać. Ja nie powiedziałem.
I think we should listen to one another. I didn't say that things are going well. I'm saying that today's problems have different roots than what is
Natomiast jak ja analizuję to wiem, że
in the slogans of the people protesting right now.
problemów, które są na hasłach. Bardzo krótko.
The thing is,
Proszę bardzo.
let me prove that.
Rolników
What do you have on banners?
jest Zielony Ład.
You have the
Przede wszystkim jak rolników pytamy,
Green Deal. This is what they are complaining, and they're also complaining about
nie ma żadnego rolnika na sali.
making land lie fallow. It has never been rolled out. Did you need to
Tak, to
leave your land fallow last year or this year?
rozumiem.
This is not the reason for lower revenues.
Pewne, drugi element, którym jest, to
Secondly,
jest z kolei Ukraina.
Ukraine.
Oczywiście w 2022 roku
Naturally,
techniczne
in 2022 you had this so-called technical grain. The market
ale od roku
was deeply shaken. But for the last year, we've had a ban on importing 4 groups of produce, and yet the prices in this time has dropped almost 50%, and wheat can be included here. So farmers are demanding further bans, and that has been ruinous to our image, because it could be solved differently. Look at how Romanians solved it. They have no import, but they have no ban.
powiem szczerze tutaj jestem
I'll be upfront with you. There was this slogan to stop transit. It caught me off guard. It is not in the spirit of the EU solutions. We need to look for solutions. There is this French gentleman that I have been traveling with there. Farmers are largely well organized. We find it difficult to have a dialogue because it's difficult to choose leaders here in Poland.
żeby z nimi rozmawiać, bo mają bardzo różne głosy. Rolnicy w Polsce są słabo zorganizowani i to jest...
The farmers in Poland are poorly organized, and that's a source of problems. We could be benefiting more if it weren't for that. You have special money earmarked for producers' groups. We could go about it differently if we organized ourselves. We would be more powerful. There are problems, and the society learns about them all too late, when it's already too late. For that reason, we should have a more balanced perspective. Negotiators, the governments, institutions, all good and very well, but I still encourage farmers to work together. To follow up on that, one sentence, and then Mr. Buzek, a former Polish Prime Minister. We have been making another mistake. Farmers were never linked to processing. Farming was left to its own devices. It was decoupled from processing. And this has been the greatest mistake that we've made. That's one. Michał and Dr. Pleva has touched upon another thing. Our counseling, advisory system is too weak. It's also relevant here. In France, you've got 500 million euros that is spent on consulting. What about here? Investment funds used, that's a separate subject. I did put a question to you. Have we used this money well? Today, we know that we need animal production, and yet, in support, SPO and other programs, you see a lot of money being spent on equipment. The stress was on automation. But the infrastructure, the buildings were not as developed as we could have done that. Mr. Jerzy Buzek, I'm really happy to see that the moderator got the mic. Yesterday, I understand there was tension here in this room. There was this tension between the people on stage and the people in the audience. I am happy to see that today the audience is much more relaxed, and it is largely due to this ongoing dialogue, and we should keep it this way, even though it's, things are quite hot here on stage. I agree with what we've heard a moment ago. It is not the EU that's the cause of our problems. Let's look at what happened 2 years ago. 30th of June, 2022, 3-4 months after the Russian invasion on Ukraine. Jointly with Mr. Balash, we sent a special letter. It was a conference similar to this one, but it was in Warsaw. We couldn't meet because, the war was raging, the Americans were getting ready. So we sent this letter. It said that what is happening on the border of Ukraine is very dangerous. It was almost 2 years ago. Somebody failed to react to that. We have a Polish commissioner, a commissioner of agriculture in the EU. Who should have reacted if not him? We are late. We have been talking, but it's all too late. We are 2 years late. The EU, you say, no, it's us. We couldn't have solved it ourselves, the Polish Prime Minister and the Polish Commissioner. It should have been solved earlier, and today people are blaming the EU. But we are a part of the EU, aren't we? Yes, I am also a part of the EU. In the European Parliament, we cast our votes and we believed that it was okay because the Polish Prime Minister, the Polish Commissioner, okayed it. Let's talk about what the Brussels perspective is like. How are they looking at us? There were some reservations. They said that we use the EU argument in our game. But remember, the market has opened up to the Polish farming. It's a huge thing. We know all that, so I'm not going to enumerate all those things. I can feel that I need to continue speaking because I'm not going to get the floor again. I can sense it. So, the EU needs to continue to operate. We need to be assertive. We need to voice our expectations, but we need to act too. Ukraine is important, but there are more things. Russia is relevant. Remember about Russia. Now is the time to act. I believe the Polish government will. It's good that Mr. Minister is with us. The global prices is not something that we can influence. The harvest in Argentina is coming to an end. Similarly, in Australia, they had a surplus there. We've had a surplus here in Europe. This is a threat. In the last few years, we've been having some problems, and now it all, overlapped. You see disasters caused by climate change. And you see that in the EU, especially in Spain, you've got fires, you've got droughts, you've got floods in some countries, there's overpopulation, floods again, frost, all too late, in unexpected moments. These are cataclysmic events. Inflation. We've had inflation in recent years. So, I've been taking notes. and we might have the situation where member states can set up their own strategies. Let's look at what's been the most beneficial in the last 20 years. The second pillar payments were the most beneficial, and they've prepared us for the worst thing. You see prices, global prices, that continue to drop. We closed the border with Ukraine, but it's not enough, apparently. Especially, it's not going to be enough for the European farmers. Our Czech colleague, Czech minister, said that they have different partners, and they are on strike in solidarity with us. Czechs didn't have this influx of Ukrainian grain. We are the only EU member state where Ukrainian grain disturbed the market. In other countries, you have other, more deeply rooted, more serious reasons. And it's a challenge for the common agricultural policy. Sir, you have huge experience when it comes to what is happening in Brussels. How likely is that issue to become a common European cause? It's already happened, but we need a program that would cover that. Let me respond to that. It's something that has already happened. We are simply failing to hear what is happening in the EU. The EU Parliament agreed to liberalize the trade with Ukraine, but there are conditions. If there is an emergent disturbance, even in one single market caused by imports from Ukraine, makes it possible to activate a brake, and the EU Commission can activate it. No Parliament or the Council needs to support that. The Commission is ready to do it. I can assure you that they will. Now, the sensitive products, you can activate it within 2 weeks. Originally, it was 3 weeks, but we convinced them to include 2. We were negotiating here, they were negotiating there. There is this lady reporter. I talked to her. Is it going to calm the market? I believe that the European community needs to help us in transiting these goods to third countries. Eggs, sugar, you need to use the mic. Unfortunately, there are certain additional things. Poland postulated more, it's true, but most of the postulates were accepted. You asked me about how the EU reacted. The EU needs to know what we want, and our postulates need to be tabled by the Polish side. Thank you so very much.
Now let us ask ministers of agriculture about their perception of these facts.
Tak jak jste se ptal na tu atmosféru, pan premiér říkal, že včera to bylo.
Well, you asked about the atmosphere.
Třeba to dneska.
And well, we could hear
Já bych jenom upřesnil.
What was happening yesterday. The atmosphere was much more heated, and I very much look forward to working out details of the agreement. And now let me add the Czech perspective to that. The Ukrainian grain, well, this is a hot topic in Czechia too. We have that at a smaller scale, but our farmers believe that import of cereals into Europe is the reason for decreasing prices. I don't think that easy, clear answers here. As Czechia, as the entire EU, we are export-oriented. we want to go beyond what we have. If we don't succeed in selling what we have, it will be stored in our silos. I don't mean specifically Ukrainian grain. We have this huge impact of grain directly from Russia. And Russia doesn't need to comply with any standards and doesn't need to meet any requirements. So Russians, they use it to support their own production of grain.
Do Czech Republic want to
I would like to have my own simple solution.
Export to European Union?
Ano, je to skutečně pozice za našeho pana ministra zemědělství, tak je pozice vyjednávací v Bruselu, aby jsme...
So indeed, this is a position of our Minister of Agriculture, and this is what we want to negotiate, and this is what we want to solve. Some ask us why we didn't take that into account and use that earlier. We were basically afraid that we would starve because of Russians occupying all the and blocking all the Black Sea ports. No one expected the situation to turn out like that. It was difficult to find the person who was responsible for the situation. One more question here.
Já bych tady souhlasil s panem Plevou, že...
I have one more comment here. Perhaps I should move away from my neighbor. I agree with the statement that farmers often have a very different concept of Green Deal and what it is. They do not follow the definition of that concept. It's not important what farmers understand as Green Deal. We need to respond to their complaints. We were active farmers. I was an active farmer, and nowadays I cannot be an active farmer. When I'm in the office, it's legally prohibited. And then, of course, we have huge drought, and we need to adapt to climate changes. We need to plan our crops carefully and think about our strategy. So,
one na pewno pokazują pewne zmiany, w których ta polityka zaczyna się zmieniać.
We heard about certain changes of the politics, and I think this is the right direction. And the previous speaker mentioned that earlier on, and perhaps things would look differently, but I remember things back in June in Warsaw. It was hot. For me, that was an exceptional day. This is when I met Minister Siekierski. We had this first conversation back then, and until now, I remember when I met him, and he was so engaged in explaining all these European agricultural concepts and matters. So, as Prime Minister Buzek said, there is certain coverage, certain information from the EU, then there are pressures, there is certain concept that government may have. You asked about Russia. We could see that it was Poland also that asked about Russia and what's coming next. Yesterday, in the agreement, there was this point added on full embargo and closing Poland for Ukrainian produce starting April 1st. actually
do wstrzymaniu tranzytu do momentu
will
wypracowania
be
odpowiednich
insisting
mechanizmów
on
dwustronnych między Polską a
postponing
Ukrainą.
the
Jeżeli my
transit
mamy skierować
until
rządowe
some
pieniądze
mechanisms
ludzi na to,
are
żeby
worked
dopłacić
out
polskim
between
rolnikom,
Poland and
my
Ukraine.
musimy
If we
włączyć
are
takie
to
możliwości, że ktoś
direct the
kupi
stream
na
of
przykład część
funding
zboża polskiego,
here,
a część
we need
zapewni
to
sobie z
have that
tranzytu, bo tam
situation that
kupi po
someone
cenach tak
buys
zwanych
some
wymiennych i kupi za
of the
pół ceny
Polish
doładuje do
grain
statku.
and some from the transit, just to have full cargo on a ship. So if we are to use some money on the market and the money is addressed at Polish farmers, the money should not go elsewhere. This is why I mentioned transit. And it's about this political goal to have good relations between Poland and Ukraine, because this is the great way to go forward. And our Ukrainian neighbors must be made aware of the fact that it is great to have a good neighbor. So we need to speak in one voice, as we did at the Weimar summit. So you asked me about the EU decisions that come from the Parliament.
I znów ja przejdę trochę osobiście, ale myślę, że jest to pewien element też wytłumaczenia naszym widzom.
I think that that explains a lot to the audience, participants of this debate. I remember when I made the decision about collaboration of my union, Agro-Unia, with the civic coalition. And there were voices saying that we shouldn't do it, but actually it was the member of the Euro Parliament from the civic coalition, Mr. Halicki, who made these amendments at the European Parliament level. Let me go back to the topic of the transit. If this solution is adopted, well, I heard that there is a ban on transit of goods. Let's not forget that we have this export 51.8 billion euro of Polish exports. And such activities can be undermined or challenged on the international arena as illegitimate or non-compliant. And then one has to assume responsibility for the sectors that are going to suffer because of that. So, for example, producers of dairy products requested the government to lift any barriers. Let us think in long-term strategy concepts, and we should not only benefit from the European market, but we also should remember its constraints. We have funds flowing into Poland. It's 471 billion. Well, direct payments is 87 billion euro. So it's over 450 billion euro over 20 years allocated to the agricultural sector. So we should look at solutions, and we should look for solutions which could serve that good strategy. We have these schemes and they are in progress. The thing is that we do not debate them locally, and we're looking for problems at the level of the European Union. So, are there any contributions from the floor? I can see one to
Według tutaj pana
3
doktora trochę chcemy być
people.
bardziej poprawni jeszcze od książki, która mówi o poprawności i o tych pewnych zasadach. Są pewne anomalia na rynku.
So there are certain anomalies on the market, but let us not be as proper as we pretend to be. The Ukrainian party appreciates the importance of all these decisions, and that is going to be an element of all these conversations and negotiations. I don't think that what you've just said is not going to help in our negotiations.
Jego dobry przegląd tego, co się dzieje, zacytuję pańskie słowa.
Bardzo
And I
dziękuję, panie
think that he
ministrze.
will
I
quote
teraz
you
głos z sali.
tomorrow,
Bardzo proszę o
the
krótkie
gentleman that I'm
wypowiedzi.
going to negotiate with.
Krótko przez
Very
was.
short contributions from the
Dzień
floor.
dobry, Adrian Pacyna, jestem rolnikiem.
Adrian Pacyna, I'm
Pytanie
a
mam do
farmer,
profesora Buzka, bo
and my
rozmawialiśmy
question
rok
goes
o
to Mr.
Fundacji
Buzek, to
Frontowej.
Professor Buzek.
Nie
We
tylko dla
talked
Polski, ale
yesterday
dla
about the
Unii,
fund
Mołdawii,
for
wschodniej Słowacji,
the
po prostu te regiony, które najbardziej
front
ucierpiały.
regions on the front, the regions that suffered the most because of the war. Perhaps the EU could express some form of solidarity here. The second question is about indexation of the budget for direct payments. Well, it's been 20 years and the amounts haven't changed. So do you think that they can be indexed by, at least by the inflation that we suffered over the past 5 years or so? Wawrzyniec Czubak, I'm from the Agricultural University in Poznań. My conclusion from what you said during this first round is as follows.
Ogromna potrzebna.
Right now, dear ministers, there is this huge need to educate farmers regarding the importance of Polish presence in the EU. The CAP is changing, and there are many other changes. There was a report published, a diagnosis of market causes that stimulated and caused all these outbreaks. So in the context of 20 years of membership, we need to have all these explanations, and the narration that we get is truly dangerous. We're looking at the context of the solutions that we have. Well, the older generation do just remember the entire development, but the young one not necessarily.
Jarosław Górski. The question. There was another tool that allowed for ad hoc interventionist purchase of produce. Couldn't you use it? Secondly, I've been a farmer for around 20 years. And let me say that we have been experiencing a greater and greater burden in the form of red tape. And area payments are also linked to a lot of paperwork. Take it off our shoulders, strengthen the second pillar so that we modernize our farms. Those who want to grow will tap into that. Or maybe they'll get cheaper loans. And you will have the number of farmers that you can find on the list cut by half. I'm a farmer from Medyka. 4 years ago, I was at a border crossing, at a blockade there, border crossing in Medyka. There, we learned about the agreement. And people are not overly optimistic, I must say. We'll see how it goes. You know, farmers have learned caution. To follow up on a few things. One, I've been listening to what you said. You have PhD, you are professors, but an average farmer is neither a PhD nor a professor. They know about sowing and planting. When it comes to the EU national law, they are not knowledgeable there. They are laypersons. So directives need to be drafted, but it is farmers that actually follow them. I got my field 40 years ago. At the time, green light was given to farming. Hardly anything was available, empty stores. You had to have coupons to buy food. And the communist ideology dominated at the time. 40 years on, we have the European Green Deal, as they call it. And I feel like we've got another ideology, but this time it is more green/red. There is a lot of ideology there, at least this is that is farmer's perspective, and there is very little realism there. Thank you for that. Very little time. Two more people. Hello. Jacek Kurczek. A question to the negotiators. Why did you negotiate this way? As a result, the processing industry has been destroyed. And a question to the current government. Why have you been poisoning us with the polluted food coming from Ukraine? It is, after all, grown on unburied bones of our forefathers. I would like to ask about education. In this debate, in other panels, it was mentioned consulting. Doesn't look good in Poland. The cap has modified it somewhat. Or are we going to change it? Are we going to give it to agriculture chambers, like it's happened in other countries, to universities like the US? Or are we going to choose yet a different path? Thank you. I represent Podkarpacie. I have a majorish farm here in Podkarpacie. I've been a farmer for 40 years. I'm a cattle breeder, an active member of the association. We had two people some time ago. We had a Swiss guy and an English guy, both 100 hectares. The English guy was aghast at how backwards we were technologically, and the Swiss person, he said, let's go to the fields, to the meadows, and he said the following. He said, you are perfect for ecological production. So we filed the necessary paperwork. And after a year, I was fed up with all that because there was so much paperwork to do. And we just gave up on the whole ecological production thing. Let me say that I agree with Dr. Pleva. Couldn't agree more. The current problems that farming is facing can be brought down to just the Green Deal and to Ukraine. There are problems that are much deeper than that. Let me summarize it. We have too much politics in the Polish agriculture. There is too much ideology even at times. There is too little economics, and proper information flow from Brussels to farms. Thank you very much for that. You got an applause, and quite rightly so. Mr. Janowski. Ladies and gentlemen, there was 1962 when CAP was created. This is when it kicked in. The budget was as high as 80% of the European community budget. And that was a huge impulse for the European agricultural growth. But you know what? As it happens quite often, many things are warped with time, corrupted with time. There have been a number of attempts to reform the whole thing, and they were attempts to reverse the course because the course was wrong, and the course was industrial. Basically, the path chosen was very harmful from the point of view of farming. I studied in the Netherlands. There, I saw cows on grids, their legs were twisted. But could you wrap up? The final is over there. No, we are running out of time. Apologies. But I need some space here. A question to you. Do you see this major problem? Major problem, that is, the modern farming as promoted by CAP, as promoted by the EU. Thank you so very much. One more sentence. There is this great opportunity for the Polish farming and for the European farming. What do I mean by that? We can move away from this bureaucracy, from the red tape, which tells us when to harvest, where to plow, and so on and so forth. Thank you for that. Thank you for your question, Mr. President. Okay, so we're back to the panelists. We have 5 minutes left. I believe that we've heard a number of valuable comments. There is one overarching theme here, the budget for the next CAP, the next perspective. And another thing, what do we expect of CAP in the future? Well, there is this need better to communicate, better to explain, especially to explain things to the younger generation. Because the younger generation has not experienced what we have experienced. They never saw the accession, how things grew and developed. And now 30-year-olds are beginning to take decisions. And they may be surprised to see those instruments and how you use them. And they might have good farms, well led, well managed. But the thing is, we need to know what we expect of the future. What budget for CAP? What objectives? Just one sentence each so that we can wrap up. Let me begin with Mr. Jerzy Buzek, a former Polish Prime Minister. Sir, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot respond to all these questions briefly, even to the one that you have put to us. I'll give it a try, though. Today, we can define our own agriculture development strategy. 10 or 20 years ago, it was not clearly articulated. Yes, there are certain criteria that are applied to CAP, at least according to the EU. I could give you 10 different directions that we should follow, but we have no time for that. I'll tell you about the effects that we want. We need to raise awareness, we need to educate people, and we need money for that. There is the Agency for Agriculture, Restructuring, Modernization. They need to introduce new technologies, we need to educate people. Precision farming is necessary. But to do all that, you need to be an expert, you need expertise, you need knowledge, you need skills, you need to digitize things. And that means that a certain leap needs to be made, and we need to work it all out. In CAP, CAP has never covered food industry, because there was this question why they never negotiated that. Now we have payments, but they are area payments, because we've got this area payment, yes we do, and different farmers are a part of this competitive market, and they choose certain things. You have different soil, you have different country, and you choose the production that they are going to pursue that is going to be best for them, the most profitable for them. But there are inherent risks there linked to all that. Climate is a factor. It's a threat to farmers. You've got droughts and you've got hurricanes. Somebody has mentioned the intervention ad hoc purchasing. Well, but you would need accounting, you would need other instruments. It's not easy. It requires a lot of deep intellectual work. It's the kind of work that we did before we exceeded the EU, and we did that in a number of areas. I've already said that. The work that we did was unimaginable. We basically rebuild all the milk facilities.
Niektóre regiony były bardziej na to nastawione. My mamy również dzisiaj politykę regionalną.
We have the regional policy too today, and we need to approach these things also regionally. We need to consider what needs to be developed and grown where. There are discrepancies there. At the time we regionalized these things, those regions had different tasks. There were these brackets, they would get money, both communes and towns and cities. And that type of huge intellectual work needs to be undertaken. It needs to be undertaken if we want to pursue our own agricultural policy under the larger EU policy. Now, this region has suffered largely because of the impact of the war, Slovakia and other Central European countries. I'm sure that special funding can be obtained in the next perspective. At this point, we are working on it. And COVID. Italy, Spain, Greece, they were impacted the most. Remember that Italy was basically decoupled from the rest of Europe for a time. And these countries have been given money, or rather loaned money. The total fund is 750 million euros. And they are getting more money than we are because they were more impacted because of COVID. Similarly, the next perspective will also need budget differentiation, and we need to put up a fight there. We need to give it our best try so that the countries that suffer the most because of the war get the most. And we need good negotiators. We need negotiators who are going to work for us. There is one thing. The European Green Deal. We in Europe have been experiencing problems, and you can learn in those documents that those problems are largely caused by those sudden catastrophic weather events, such as droughts and floods and so on. And it's all interlinked.
Well, certainly our guests are more interested in opinions expressed by representatives of the Polish party. I'm certainly for reducing red tape, control mechanisms, reduce bottlenecks. I can hear and I confirm that it's difficult to find the right balance between the single market and domestic markets, national markets, and we need to come up with that balance. Well, it's never going to be perfect. On the other hand, farmers would definitely like to have national markets more regulated. But on our market, we have better conditions for pork production. So the farmers would prefer this single market approach. The CAP delivers its goals through the strategic plans, and we need to come up with the optimum setting. Let me give you one example from Czechia. Czech farmers protested that point of Green Deal that required reduction of pesticides. It's not that Czech farmers are for pesticides, but Czech farmers use 4 times less pesticides than farmers in other parts of Europe. Well, I think that the CAP budget should be analyzed. Well, you said that something was 75% of the CAP budget, but I believe that since we have that food security, then that investment is reasonable. The question is whether it's enough.
Przewidzianej wspólnej polityki rolnej muszą być tak kierowane, żeby trafiały przede wszystkim.
Well, the CAP funds must go first to the farmers who truly farm their land. I won't be going into detail here. And then without going too much into details and discussing all the topics here, a lot has been said about bureaucracy and about farmers.
To ja tylko powiem, wspomnę dzisiejsze
And
słowa,
their
które ja usłyszałem rano.
lack of understanding of the legislation. Our Czech guest must catch his flight, so let's thank him with a round of applause. And today I was listening to this very short conversation with Mr. Balasz. He said, it's not important how you speak, it's important how they understand you. Well, that's an important thing, really. Right, I hope that will be understood in the right way, that you will hear what I say. Well, that budget can be changed, but we need a consensus from all heads of all states, and we do not have that for now. As for the funding from that shield, I think this is a potential option, and the EU doesn't impose anything here, and active farmers may have it that the funds will go where they are the most needed. Let me just emphasize again that these eco schemes can be streamlined without engaging Brussels. Then, as for geolocation, well, that has been, you're right here, that has been growing in importance, and the European Commission has prepared a questionnaire, and it's collecting responses from all EU respondents. The window for that will start running on the 7th of April. So it is to improve the situation of farmers, but it's not addressed to farmers only. And finally, we didn't negotiate certain parts of the food processing industry. There are some sectors that are more successful in their operations. So we have, for example, dairy co-ops. So I strongly encourage farmers to get organized. And when I look at this farmers' movement, and I think it could have a positive outcome. One positive outcome would be for farmers to unite and achieve something in that common agricultural policy. I think that we have farmers to thank for their demanding certain concessions. Well, farmers were saying that they didn't want that laying land fallow, and no one listened to them. At that time, Europe was only listening to these environmental activists, and I think that the society realize, we get that clear message across, and that message was given in this plain language. We want to have a national policy, because if we simply follow the economic raison d'être, then our farms are going to disappear. We need to have a program. So I promised half a sentence to Prime Minister Buzek. Well, I think that it's worth saying very openly that the EU is fully prepared to hear our demands. We need to understand the situation on the agricultural market. We need to impose certain a break on the imports from the Ukraine, and it is in place. So that demand hasn't been put forward earlier on. So perhaps this Green Deal must have some speed-reducing mechanisms in several places. But let's leave this European Green Deal as it is in general. Well, the climate changes will be heavily felt by the Polish farmers, and we must proceed with caution here. Thank you, sir. We debated the farming community in Europe. For 20 years now, Poland has been and is this permanent chain in that community, and we will cooperate, we will work together. I believe that we will stand arm in arm with our partners. We will not be alienated. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.